So I gotta tell you the story about why we're making a new crosscut sled. I was in my shop the other day, just working hard as usual. That particular day, my billionaire client, Bruce, swung by to pick up his cutting board I made for him. That guy is stealthier than a ninja, I swear. So he picks up his cutting board, stuffs a stack of cash in my pocket, and says thanks. But as he's making his way towards the shop door to leave, he stops, and he turns to me and he says, "You should make a video on how to build a crosscut sled people will actually want to use. And when you do, make it black." Before I could ask him why, he was gone. So I made a crosscut sled that you're actually going to want to use on your future woodworking projects. So the beauty of making your own crosscut sled is that you can make it whatever size that you want. You can make a big one or you can make a small one, but it's really going to be what's the best fit for you and your shop. Once the main base has been cut, I move on to cutting the tracks that are going to fit into the miter slots of the table saw. The first step is to go to the chop saw to cut it to length, and then we go to the table saw to cut out the thickness and the width. We're going to go through a little bit of adjusting to make sure that it has a nice snug fit, but it slides freely. I chose to use red oak for the tracks because it is a hardwood, so it's going to be more durable and it's going to last a lot longer. It also holds up to the dramatic changes in our seasons here in the Midwest. If you don't want to make your own miter slot tracks, you can always purchase some plastic ones from online. I've heard that they work pretty well. After I finish cutting out these tracks, I'm going to use these spacers to ensure that there's clearance from the bottom of the miter slot to the bottom of the track. This is going to allow the crosscut sled to slide freely, and it's going to make sure that you have a smooth cut every time. So this is the first time that I tried to glue the tracks on before putting screws in, and it really didn't go as planned. So the first try just didn't work out. So I'm going to try it again, and this time I'm going to let it sit a little bit longer. Well, the glue that I bought just doesn't seem to be sticking for some reason. So since the glue didn't work, we're going to put a couple screws in it. So we're going to add 2 more screws to each track. And this is going to ensure that each track stays nice and straight. Because the last thing that you want is your track to get all crooked, because then it won't slide. Once the tracks have been securely fastened to the bottom of the crosscut sled, we're going to take some sandpaper, we're going to sand it smooth. And you're going to repeat this process until you're happy with the way it slides. We're going to make a cut in here, but we're not going to cut all the way through yet, just so we can see where the blade is. And then we're going to measure off of that, put 2 tracks over here, put 2 tracks over here, and that'll be for our T-tracks to mount to the actual sled itself. So now I'm just measuring off where I want the T-tracks to fall on the sled. I chose to do 4 tracks, 2 on the left, 2 on the right. This will give me the ability to cut any angle on either side of the crosscut sled with ease. Once I know where my T-tracks are going to fall, I take my T-square and I draw a line from the front to the back of the sled. I'm going to use a 3/4 inch straight bit, which is going to fit the T-track that I bought. By the way, everything in today's build you'll find down in the description below. Now I'm going to set the depth on my plunge router to the same depth of the T-track. To ensure that I get a nice straight cut, I'm going to clamp down this piece of wood as a guide for my router. So it turns out my 3/4 inch straight bit was not the same size as the T-track. So all I had to do to make that adjustment is move my guide just a little bit. And now it fits perfect. So now that I cut the 2 tracks on one side, we're going to rotate the sled and repeat the process. So now I'm going to make the fence for the back of my crosscut sled. And to do that, we're going to use my janky router table setup. I made this thing years ago. Since then, I've changed my table saw fence, and now my router fence doesn't fit right. Eventually, I'm going to make a new router table. Keep an eye out for that video in the future. So we're using a router table to put the T-track on the top of our fence. This T-track is going to use our flip stop. This flip stop is going to be a huge upgrade from my previous crosscut sled. It's going to be much faster and safer to make my repeatable cuts. Now I'm going to move on to cutting out my 2 miter gauges for this crosscut sled. One for the left, one for the right. This is going to allow me to set up my miter gauges on either side of this crosscut sled. This is going to ensure for a perfect miter every time. Now we're going to go over to the miter saw and we're going to cut our back fence and our front fence to length. So I did a quick little dry fit just so I could see what it's going to look like. Now we're going to move on to the face of this project. We're going to use a black laminate that's going to give it a nice, clean, smooth surface. This black laminate is going to make this crosscut sled pop. It's really going to give it that dramatic look that I was looking for. I've used laminates before on cabinets and things, but I've never used it on one of my sleds. This is going to make sure that it's going to stay nice and smooth and it's going to last for a really long time. I'm going to use my Makita track saw to cut this laminate. It's the perfect saw for this job. It's going to ensure a nice clean and straight cut for all of my laminate cuts. Be sure to keep an eye out for my Makita track saw video coming out soon. To attach the laminate, we're going to use our water-based contact adhesive to apply it to both surfaces. You allow it to dry and tack up. You want to make sure that you use the proper contact adhesive so that this project lasts for a long time. And then we repeat this process on all the laminate pieces for this project. In order for the contact adhesive to work properly, all the water has to evaporate from the adhesive, and I found that a heat gun speeds this process up. Once all the adhesive is dried and cured, use a roller and apply pressure, and all your laminates would stick. Keep in mind, if the adhesive isn't dried properly, it will not stick. When I was making this crosscut sled, I was aiming for more than just a multifunctional crosscut sled. I wanted this to be a very aesthetically pleasing sled in my shop. The cool thing about these laminates is that they come in tons of colors. So if you wanted to add this to your crosscut sled, there's plenty of options for you to customize your sled to complement your shop. Once all the laminate has been attached, we're gonna use our trim router to flush cut all the laminate back. This is gonna reveal all the T-track slots. Once the main sled has been trimmed, I'm gonna trim the laminate on my front and back fence. Once all the laminate's been trimmed back, we're gonna switch over to a chamfer bit, and we're gonna put a nice smooth edge on the front and the back fence. My hands are gonna thank me for this later. Speaking of hands, why don't you take yours and give this video a like, so I know you're enjoying this video so far. Once all the laminate's been trimmed, we're just gonna go back and give it a quick sand to make sure that all the T-tracks fit in tight. Then we're gonna use our mallet and tap the T-tracks down into place. One of the cool things of this track is that they come pre-drilled for all of my screws. Once the T-track is in place, we're gonna attach it with a bunch of number 6 half-inch screws. Use a self-centering drill bit to make sure that your pilot hole is right in the center of the provided holes on the T-track. This ensures that the T-track doesn't move left or right when you put your screw in. As I mentioned earlier, all the materials used in this build are gonna be found in the description below. Now we're gonna attach the front fence to the sled. I'm using 3-inch screws to drill it down in place. Now we're gonna make a cut through our front fence, but we're still gonna stop short from cutting all the way through our sled until I attach the back fence. The back fence is the key to this whole project. The back fence has to be perpendicular with the saw blade. This is gonna ensure for a perfect square cut every time. So we're gonna make 5 cuts on this piece of wood to show how square this sled actually is. Now it's time to get nerdy. We're gonna crunch some numbers to see how square this thing actually is. Once I'm happy with how square the sled is, we'll attach the back fence with all the remaining screws. With every project, you're always gonna have to make little tweaks. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, I had to widen my T-track so that the bolts would fit.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to see.
Speaking of these hold downs, I decided to give them a nice paint job so they would fit the dramatic feel that I was going for with this crosscut sled. So while the paint's drying, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna fine tune all the little parts of this sled. Along with all the little adjustments, we're gonna put a coat of paste wax on the bottom of this sled to make sure that it slides really well. Paste wax is just the secret sauce to a smoother operation of any sled you make for your table saw. I'm excited to have these hold downs because now I don't have to use my fingers to hold the wood in place. Now we're gonna take a 1/4 bolt and pick out a knob to attach our miter gauges. So the head of the bolt did hit the screws in the bottom of the T-track, so I had to take them over to the grinder and bring them down just a little bit. This is gonna make sure that they slide smooth while I'm using the T-track. Now I'm gonna attach the last piece of T-track to my back fence. This is for the flip stop. I'm super excited for this flip stop. It's gonna be a huge improvement over clamping a piece of wood to my back fence every time. I think I'm gonna call it the Bat Sled. And now for some test cuts. We're gonna use our miter gauge to make a 45-degree angle and a hold down to hold it in place.
Never had hold downs like that.
I'm really geeking out over these hold downs, man. They're working out so great. And now that I'm done with the miter gauge, we just unscrew it and take it right off the sled and we can jump right to a straight cut. This crosscut sled worked out really well. You can expect to be seeing this in a lot of my future videos. Now you can use your new crosscut sled to make your very own French cleat tool wall. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.